Amen. Thank you, ladies. Turn your Bibles to the Gospel of John, chapter 11. Gospel of John, chapter 11. Exciting to hear from Brother Jeremy this morning, all the things going on. And I think at first I was wondering why we were doing the slideshow of his trip to Armenia. But you could see, and I don't mean to say that facetiously, but you could see how excited he was, how God worked that out for the salvation of his family. And man, that's just awesome. Think about that. His family that he hadn't seen in 8 and 15 years. And God, just by praying and witnessing, being faithful to God, and Lord brought his family to a saving knowledge of him. That ought to encourage you. God, I encourage you as you pray for those that you know and loved ones that are lost, that God would show them the light. John chapter 11, verse 25. John chapter 11, verse 25. Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. Whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this? I want to put your attention on verse 26. Whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Think about that truth for a second. Shall never die. And then notice the challenge here. Believest thou this? Do you believe this? Not do you hope in this, do you believe it? Is this the truth that your life is centered on? Believest thou this? Title of my message this evening is Shall Never Die. Shall never die. In this passage here in John chapter 11, we have just, the preceding verses have recorded the happenings of Lazarus. Lazarus, the friend and follower of Jesus, the brother of Mary and Martha, died. So it gives you a little bit of context of who Jesus is saying this to. He's saying it to Martha, and her brother just died, and he is telling her, if you believe on me, you shall never die. Have you ever gone to a funeral and told someone, oh, you're not going to die. You shall never die. Like, wait a second. It's confusing. What do you mean? Word had reached Jesus that Lazarus was sick and that it was serious. He responded to the news in verse 4. Put your eyes back on verse 4 of chapter 11 there. When Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. So Jesus hears, he's far away from where Lazarus is at. He hears that Lazarus, his friend, is sick, and he already knows about it. He knows what's happening. He knew of his sickness. He knew of the anguish. He knew of the messenger coming. Why? Because Jesus is God. Jesus is God. He knows all of these things already. And Jesus not only knew about the sickness in his omniscience, but also in his omnipotence, also knew that God and that he desired to use this sickness for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified. And in the context of the Gospel of John, particularly chapters 9, 10, and 11, here's a good study. Go through there and underline every time the word believe shows up, or believeth, because this is what Jesus was doing. He's performing all these miracles. He's doing all these things so that people would believe him. Believe him. And really, what people? His people who had the truth would simply believe him. Believe that he is who he says he is. He's performing miracles, and the reason, the stated reason for these miracles is that people might believe him. And so that's what it means here to glorify God, that the Son of God might be glorified, ultimately, that he might be believed upon, that they would believe that he is who who he says he is. Jesus waited these 2 days in the same place and then announced his intentions to go to Judea and see Lazarus. The disciples then respond with nervousness and caution because of the increased hostility from the Jews that they were experiencing. So as Jesus is performing miracles, as Jesus is healing the blind, as Jesus is healing the lame, as Jesus is doing all of these things, he is also forgiving sinners of their sin, and he is claiming to be God himself. He is claiming deity. And this is what's throwing the Jews off their kilter. They are not willing to believe that Jesus is God. And so now this hostility is risen against them. And the disciples were, by human standards, nervous. And what I mean by, they had reason to be nervous. The Jews could be hostile. These Pharisees could be hostile people. The Bible talks about they had already taken up to stone him. To this, Jesus responds in verse 11. These things said he, after that he saith unto them, our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awake him out of a sleep. Then said his disciples, Lord, if he's asleep, he shall do well. Howbeit Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought that he had spoken of taking of rest in sleep. They didn't know he was dead. Jesus already knew he was dead. Jesus referring to Lazarus is dead, I'm going to raise him up. They thought Lazarus was asleep, and they're like, well, listen, if he's only sleeping, that's good. Isn't sleep good for sick people? He's going to rest, and he'll get better. Why do we need to go to Judea? Like, that's where trouble is at. Then said Jesus unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Lazarus is dead. He knew this already. And look what he says here in verse 15. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent that ye may believe. Nevertheless, let us go unto him. So, man, what a bedside manner. Hey, Lazarus is dead already. What? And I'm glad he's dead. What? What are you saying? He says, no, I'm glad he's dead for your sakes, that I was not there. Remember, they all believed at this point. Even Martha and Mary are going to come up to Jesus. They believed, if you had been here, he would still be alive. We have seen you heal the sick. But their vision was not yet greater than Jesus as simply the healer of the sick. And Jesus was trying to, you got to understand what Jesus is doing here. Jesus, by his presence, was trying to alter, shift, totally change their perspective on everything. Everything you have believed up until now, let's throw that away, because I'm about to introduce into I am introducing into your life factors that the unregenerate man, the unbeliever, the one that does not know and believe the word of God, the one that does not believe on me, cannot even fathom. It doesn't even make sense. The words don't make sense. You're speaking like a crazy person. And this is what their mind is just getting warped and bent around. And this is what Jesus is doing to us as well. Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent ye may believe. Nevertheless, let us go unto him. Then said Thomas, which is called Didymus, unto his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. Now, they're not talking about Lazarus here. They're talking about Jesus. So Thomas is like, all right. I mean, a lot of times we throw Thomas under the bus. But there's indication here that Thomas was like, guys, he's intent on going. I don't think we're talking him out of it. And they tried to stone us last time. They tried to kill us. We can't let him go by himself. We can't let him die by himself. We're going to go die with him. So kudos to Thomas, right? There's a little bit of, if he's going to die, I'm going to go die with him. We're going to take our place. Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad for your sakes. Now, let's take that statement there for a second. This kind of gives us an answer as to why, this kind of gives us answers to why does God allow certain things to happen to certain people. Because we're learning here, like something bad happened to Lazarus. And Mary and Martha are suffering because of that. Lazarus suffered because of that. Jesus says, no. There's a purpose here, and this ultimate purpose that God might be glorified. And so there's a bigger working, and so it kind of gives us an indication, or it gives us a high altitude perspective of the working and perspective of God. You know, sometimes we're like, well, why is this happening to me? Or why do I have to go through this? Or why do I have to experience this? And yet Jesus is pulling back the envelope, pulling back the curtain here and saying, it is bigger than you. Now, are you willing for your life and the happenings of your life to be bigger than you? Bigger than you, bigger than your spouse, bigger than your children, bigger than your family. Sometimes we can't think bigger. We can't think by that. Like, no, nothing here. No, but Jesus is saying, hey, there's some things going on here, and I intend to work, and it's bigger than you. It's bigger than you. We made note here also, interesting, that Thomas was making a statement of being already dead with Jesus. Now, Lazarus, the Bible goes on, and we go through the narrative here. Lazarus had been dead in the grave for 4 days. So they had this conversation at the 2-day mark, and they kind of wait, and then they know about it. They wait 2 days. And so 4 days have passed. Jesus has traveled to Judea, and Martha meets Jesus with disappointment. You know, reverential disappointment. You ever done that with God? Like, I'm smart enough to like shake my fist at you, but I want to kind of slide in some disappointment. Notice what she says here in verse 21. Then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. True. That's a huge expectation, a huge disappointment. There's signals here of her, but listen, not your will, and we get it, but she's expressing this disappointment to Jesus. To which Jesus responds with truth. And beloved, truth ought to trump our disappointments. That's actually the ladder out of disappointment. When you find yourself in the hole of disappointment, the ladder out of disappointment is truth. The truth of what God says. The truth of the real reality. Not the pseudo-reality of the disappointment. Not the perception of the disappointment, but rather truth. And so Jesus responds to her with truth. And look here in verse 23. And Jesus said unto her, thy brother shall rise again. I mean, that's comforting. That's comforting. It's bold. We then see Martha dismisses this truth by lobbing out a distant future expectation. Now, we kind of do this sometimes. We're going to see them again. But it's a half-hearted sentimentality that kind of falls on half-hearing ears. So Martha, Jesus says, no, he shall rise again. Martha goes, no, I know, but it's going to be in the future. You know, look what she says here in verse 24. Martha said unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. In other words, that truth that he says he shall rise again does not necessarily dissuade her disappointment. So she kind of lobs out this, and it's in fainted belief. She's thinking, no, I know in the future there's going to be this thing, but that truth was not affecting her present reality. Okay? And so, and we comfort each other like this sometimes. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying understand what is happening here and what it is that Jesus is trying to do. In her mind, she was totally involved with the finality of what she had witnessed in the death of her brother. Yet she loves and honors Jesus and desperately wants to believe him, but she is trying to believe him inside the paradigm and the context that fits within her earthly perception. She is trying to make the truth of Jesus fit into a human box. And her human box is this thing that we call our lifespan. And she's like, okay, what you're saying does not fit within the context of birth to death as us normal human beings understand it. We observe it. We observe people being born. We observe people dying. What you just said, I can't put in that. I can't put between, on the gravestone, the parentheses. I can't put that between the parentheses of the dates. I can't put that in the, I don't know where in the dash, maybe it's the dash I'm looking for, the dash between the 2 years. I don't know where to put that truth there. And so the only place I know to put that truth is outside of my present reality and outside of my present perception. Into this other place, way over there. Because it's more rational and it's more safe for me to believe it there than to believe it here. You understand what I'm saying? So she doesn't want to say, nuh-uh, or Jesus, you're lying. But she's also saying, I don't know how to fit this into my paradigm. So yes, Lord, I understand later on in the resurrection, later on in the last days, way in this future perception that really has no ramification, this future idea that has no ramifications over my present reality. So she kind of lobs it out there. You ever do that? Listen, we do this a lot with theology. We do this a lot with the words of Jesus. We don't know what to do with them, so we kind of, we I don't know what, what's the word I'm looking for? We pass the buck. We just say, all right, I don't know how to deal with this truth in my reality. I don't know how to apply this to my life right now, so I'm going to punt it. Maybe that's what I'm looking for. I'm just going to punt it over there. I'm going to kick the can down the road because I don't know what to do with this right now. Because I got to get it out of my context right now because I don't know what this means for me right now. And beloved, this truth that we're talking about, we kind of do that. I don't know what that means with me right now. So Jesus, so here she comes. Jesus, I'm disappointed. If you were here, you could have saved her. He shall rise. Well, what did Jesus say? Thy brother shall rise again. He offers her this truth. She doesn't know what to do with it, so she lobs it out. I almost fell down. She Hail Marys it out of here. Can a Baptist preacher say that? Okay. Gets it out of this conversation right now. Maybe that's what she's trying to do, right? Get it out of this. I get it, yes, Jesus, but I'm talking about right now. So she tries to lob it way out there, okay? Like she's trying to down the football. And notice what Jesus is about to do. He's going to grab it back out of the air and say, nuh-uh. You can't do it. No, I'm bringing this right back. I'm bringing this right back. So Martha dismisses this truth by lobbing it out as a distant future, almost meaningless expectation. Catch this. Jesus, in dramatic fashion, grabs this distant future, almost irrelevant, weak comment that she makes and brings it right back into the very moment they were sharing and the very person that was standing right in front of her. Brings it back, that comment. And then look what he says in verse 25. Jesus says unto her, I am the resurrection. See, she was talking about this future distant thing. She says, no, I'm it. I am the resurrection. It's standing right in front of you, right now in this moment. I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. So he's like bringing it back. But so far, he has not quite said anything that she's like, no, that's what I said. We believe in you and someday in the future. That's not what he's saying right now. Jesus is talking about his present reality, the present situation. But then look here in verse 26. And then he says, and whosoever liveth and believeth in me. So if you're alive and you're believing in him, beloved, that's you. Alive and believing in him. In me, notice what he says, shall never die. Shall never die. Now notice, he doesn't qualify the statement. He doesn't explain himself. He doesn't interpret different versions and perceptions of death. He just plainly says, if you're alive and you believe in me, you're not going to die. He shall never die. And then he says, believest thou this? Do you believe it? Do you really believe it? In other words, he's saying, no, Mary, I'm not going to allow you to be dismissive of this truth by relegating it to some distant future. Right now, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. The thing that you're talking about, that you're hoping for, the truth that you're punting down because you can't figure it out, is standing in front of you right this very moment. You shall never die. You shall never die. What Jesus is saying to her, notice in the statement, I am the resurrection and the life. Death and life simultaneously right now. Resurrection is what? Victory over death. It's coming back from the dead. It's after death. So he's putting resurrection and life simultaneously right there in front of you. Now I know some of you are looking, okay, where are you going with this? Follow me. We're getting there. He that believes in me, though he is dead, he shall live. He shall live. And then get what he is about to say about you and I. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. You shall never die. Deal with that. Not justify it. Not rationalize it. Not punt it some other place for smarter people to figure out. He is challenging Martha in that moment. Figure out what I just said. And then, before he's seen any proof of a resurrection yet, he says to her, believe this? Do you believe it? How guilty are you of being dismissive of this truth? He just said, you will never die. Seriously. He said, you'll never die. And right now in your mind, you're thinking, no, I know, we're never going to die, but we're still going to die. But that's not what he's saying. He's not qualifying the statement. He's saying, no. You will never die. That is the truth that you need to live your life by. That is the truth that needs to invade your mind. That is the foundation of your thinking. Your perception needs to be altered from this idea of life and death and to understand that you now have eternal life. You shall not die. I know, Pastor Jay. We will get to live with Jesus forever in heaven in the future. And someday we get to experience that great eternal day and sing praises to God in a place that I cannot even imagine. It is going to be, cannot even imagine how wonderful it's going to be, or at least I know I'm supposed to believe that it's going to be that wonderful. But that is not what Jesus is saying here. He's not talking about some future distant existence. He's talking to her right now. You're not going to die. This is not what Jesus is saying here. He is looking someone in the eye who just witnessed the death of her brother and said, though he were dead, yet shall he live. Now, understand the context of who he's saying. This is not in a classroom having a theoretical discussion on theology. This is Jesus talking to a woman who just lost her brother and said, he's going to live. Though he were dead, yet shall he live. While the verb here for shall he live is in the future sense, we understand by context that Jesus means not the future, like way later on in the future, in some distant resurrection, but for Lazarus physically in a future, like in a few minutes, like shortly. This is what Jesus is talking about. Because he knows what he's about to do here, right? He's going to rise Lazarus from this dead. But then, so Jesus is not, she is trying to take what Jesus is saying by saying, I am the resurrection and the life. Though someone's dead, they shall live. Though you're alive, you shall not die. And she wants to project it into a reality outside of her present reality, and he won't let her do that. He keeps bringing it right back to right here, right now. So this is something he's insisting upon that she believes right now. Not future, her present reality. So then we understand, we further understand this by what Jesus tells Martha directly. So because he talks about raising from the dead, when he talks about that believed in death, though he were dead, yet shall he live, knowing what Jesus knows as he says his words, that in a few minutes or a few moments, he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He's going to call Lazarus up out of the grave. He's talking about a present reality. He also then means to imply in Martha's life that this idea of that you that believe, that are alive and believe shall never die, ought to be her present perspective. So John 11, verse 26, and whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die, believeth thou this? Not later, now, shall never die. Do you believe this? Shall never die. No, I know, Pastor Jay. The Bible says to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And that our last breath here will be followed by our first breath there. But can I make to you the contention that Jesus is not talking about a distant, he's not talking about a future moment in your life. He is talking to Martha about right now. Believest thou this? Do you believe this now? You're not going to die. I just seen it. You're not going to die. I just saw him die. He's not dead. But how do I unsee what my eyes have seen? Jesus is challenging Martha's very perception of life and death in her present reality. Jesus said, if you believe on him, you will never die. Do you believe this? You'll never die. Not do you believe a semblance of this. Not do you believe a rationalization of this. But simply taking Jesus at his word that when he says you shall not die, that's the truth. I shall not die. Let me give you two things real quick, and I'm going to bring it home right here. Jesus is challenging you to change your perception of life and death right now because he is the resurrection. See, we're trying to take this truth and squeeze it in to our perception, our human definition, our conception of what life and death is. And maybe by Jesus telling a living person who will someday stop breathing that, hey, you're never going to die, he is trying to radically change her perception of what life and death is. And though you just saw your brother die and you think he's dead and he is in the grave, and that's your context and definition of death, what I'm about to tell you and what I am telling you and what I'm going to verify with what I'm about to show you. Because listen, his words would still be true even if he had not raised Lazarus physically from the dead. Even if Lazarus had not come out of the grave, that miracle, that action was just to validate the words that he was saying so that they would believe him. They're still true. And what Jesus is challenging you and I is to crumple up the perception and the fears of what the world defines life and death, that so much rule our life, and to have a perception of life and death based upon the fact, the truth, that Jesus is the resurrection, and that if you believe in him, ye shall not die. That's how we ought to live. I can't die. Let's explain a little bit. So I'm going to give you two statements here, and hopefully this kind of, like Pastor Jay is like, man, I think you're trying to tell me something, but I don't know. Or I think I know, but I'm not. How do I apply this to my life? Jesus is challenging you to change your perception of life and death right now because he is the resurrection. Point number one. Let me just say the statement. Life is more than what you are afraid to lose. Life is more than what you're afraid to lose. See, we have this perception of what end of life means. And we hate it. We're afraid of it for all the things we're afraid we're going to lose. And so we define life based on the fear of what we're going to lose. This is why we don't want to lose it. Like, I'm holding on to life. There's this perception I have of life, and this life I'm holding on to because once I no longer have this life as I define life, my perception of life, my reality of life, in which that perception and reality of life is really no different than how the world defines life, and it's no different than how an animal defines life. And so there's this idea that once I lose that, I have lost everything, and I'm afraid to lose those things. And so we're afraid of losing life. And so life, understand this, so Jesus is not saying that there's not going to come a moment in your life where you're going to stop breathing, but he is saying you're not going to die. Think about that. He is not saying, because we know, right, from observation, he is not saying that there's not going to be a moment in your present reality of this, flesh and blood, that you're not going to stop breathing someday. But he's also saying you're not going to die. And what he's challenging us, what he is challenging you, is to reorient your definition and perception of what life is. See, we think life is breathing. We think life is food and raiment. We think life is about clothing and things that we can, all the things in life. We even think life is about relationship. And we are so afraid. So we cling to life and we live our life trying to gather and trying to cling to things that we're afraid to lose. And Jesus is saying, if you can lose it, it's probably not life. Because the life I'm giving you, you can't lose. Do you see where I'm going with this? So all the things that we hold dear in our life and all the things that we hold precious and the things that keep us up at night and the things that worry us and the things that we live for and we apply ourselves to, and yet then we start to acquire them, and then we get so much stuff that first of all, I live to try to get those things, whether it's material or relationally or physique or whatever it might be, and we live to try to get it, and then sometimes to our own disgrace, we end up getting it, and then when we get it, we're afraid to lose it, so we play so cautious. And the worst thing I had, my number one coaching mistakes, and I did it again this last week, was coaching the team not to lose instead of coaching them to win. And I keep telling myself, don't do that anymore, because every time you do that, you almost lose, or you lose. Stop coaching them not to lose. Start coaching them to win. And beloved, so often we get trapped in living our life and trying not to lose by holding on to what we can't keep. Believing that that is life. Well, that's just my life. That thing, that's just my life. Well, that job, that's just my life. Well, this house, that's just my life. Well, these kids, that's just my life. And this spouse, that's just... Now listen, I am not minimizing those things. So please don't take this the wrong way. And there is no way of insult there. What I am trying to do is by lifting you up and take this thing that the world has doomed on us of losing and losing and losing. And Jesus says, if you believe on me, you can't lose life. So therefore, what I am afraid of losing must not be life. It must be something else. Life is more than what I'm afraid to lose. You'll hold on life in different parts of your life for fear of you hold on to life in different parts of your life for fear of losing them, but Jesus says you can't lose life. Which then begs the question, what am I so afraid of losing? Perhaps what I am afraid of losing is not really life to begin with. What if I'm defining life and valuing my life wrong based upon what I'm afraid to lose, not based upon Jesus said I'll never die? That's kind of how we define life, right? So we hold on to it. I don't want to lose this. I don't want to, whatever. And yet that's not how Jesus defined life. He says you can't lose it. Life is more than what you're afraid of losing. Life is more than what you're afraid of losing. Actually, if we're going to define life the way Jesus defines life, life is the things that we can't lose. That's life. That's life because he says we have eternal life. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 25, therefore I say unto you, take no thought of your life, what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor yet not for your body or what you shall put on. Is not the life more than meat and the body than raiment? In other words, Jesus is trying to tell us here in Matthew chapter 6, life is more than that. It's more than that. Those things are temporary. You can lose them. Those things will die. But your life is more than the things that perish or the things that change or the things that transition or the things that move ahead. See, life is not defined by the staticness of our present reality. It continues on. It does not end for the believer. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19, lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, where thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth nor rust doth corrupt, and where thieves do not break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. See, we do this to ourselves and we do this to our kids. We gear them up of what this life is about. And beloved, what life is really about to the believer it's not about the things that corrupt on this earth, but it's about those things that cannot be taken away. Cannot be taken away. So often you fall in the trap of defining your whole life based on what you cannot keep instead of defining your life based upon what you cannot lose. That's life. What can't I lose? What can I lose? I like the sentiment when someone passes away and they die. In other words, they physically stop breathing and someone says, well, I haven't lost them because I know where they're at. There's been a transition. There's been a change. But if they are a believer, there's still life. Thou shalt never die. That's what the Bible says. And so Jesus says this to the living, and he says it to the dead. He says the dead shall live. They're alive. In other words, change your perception of life and death. This is why a missionary like Jim Elliot could say something like this. He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep in order to gain what he cannot lose. So how do we make this truth and not punt it down the field, but apply it to our lives today? You shall not die. You shall never die. Number one, life is more than what I'm afraid to lose. Hey, beloved, if you can lose it, it's probably not life. And this house can burn up. That's why it's not life. Hey, this money can inflate away. That's why it's not life. Hey, this context of this household will change. That's why it's not life. It's a segment, it's a season. But if that's what I'm living for, then you're going to be highly disappointed when the Lord changes it. Or by nature, it changes. But the individuals of a household believing on Jesus can never be lost. Can never be lost. Life, because shall never die. Shall never die. Life is more than what I'm afraid to lose. But ask yourself this. What is it that you're living for that can't be lost? What is it that you're living for that can't be lost? Let me use this illustration. I had a different one, but I can't share it with you. Sometimes we value a child's education. You gotta go get a college degree. You gotta go get, it's so important. Beloved, that's gonna be lost. That whatever degree ain't gonna matter a hill of beans in heaven. Now, I'm not saying those are not worthy pursuits, and God cannot call someone to do that. But that to be elevated over their spiritual condition. Beloved, I would rather my children have spiritual vision than even physical vision. To have sight, to see him, to know him. See, I don't want to be held in bondage, or I don't want to live for the things that I can lose. I want to live for the things that can't be lost, because that's life. That's really where life is at. And we get ourselves so wrapped up in things that are so easily taken away. Even your own health. Like that, right? Just like that. That doesn't define my life. But rather the things that Jesus says I can never lose. Because he says, you shall never die. Life is more than what I am afraid to lose. And then secondly, quickly, grab a hold of this. Death is less than what I'm afraid will happen. Death is less than what I'm afraid will happen. The fear of death holds people in bondage. Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 15, and deliver them who through the fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. The world fears this. The world is willing to accept the chains of tyranny for fear of the bondage of the fear of death. We're seeing this play right before our eyes. In their mind, death is so grand, so ominous, that I'd rather bow down and be alive than stand up and be free. What does it matter? What does freedom matter? What does liberty matter? What does conscience matter if you're dead? Because to them, death is so ominous, it's so big. And yet Jesus is saying, y'all, listen, no. Death is not this thing that you're perceiving it to be. Though he's dead, he shall live. And those of you that believe in are alive, you're never going to die. Put death in its right perspective. And this is how we ought to start thinking about it, that death is less than what I'm afraid will happen. They are afraid of the moment they will stop breathing. The moment they perceive they can no longer exercise will. I can't do anything after I'm dead. So I'm afraid of it. And yet Jesus says to you, you shall never die. Will you stop breathing someday? Yes. But you must rectify and justify your perception and dread of that moment with the truth that Jesus says you will never die. so afraid of dying. I don't want to die. I don't want to stop breathing. I don't want to leave everything. I don't want to lose what I have here. And I don't want to let go. And I'm afraid of what that's going to be like. And I'm afraid of this, of death. And yet Jesus says, ye shall not die. So whatever it is that death is, and whatever that mystery of death might be, and whatever that transaction might look like, I have to then come to the reality that what Jesus is saying to me is that death is less than what I'm afraid will happen. It's less than that. The world calls and fears the snuffing out of death as dreaded death, a breath as dreaded death. But Jesus says, you shall never die, because the life you now have is in him will never end. The life you now have in him shall never end. And beloved, that is life. That's life. And when my life is wrapped up in him, I shall never die. And what I hold dear is wrapped up in him. I shall never lose it. And when my treasures are laid up in heaven, they shall never be taken away. Ye shall never die. Ye shall not die. In conclusion, the problem is where we struggle with life and death. Life is more than what I'm afraid to lose, and death is less than what I'm afraid will happen. Let me conclude it with this. The problem is we want the life we want to be eternal, not the life Christ has given us to be eternal. See, we have this perception of the life we want. And we want that life to be eternal. And Jesus is saying, no. You lay down your life and you take up the life that I have given you. And that life, that is eternal. That is eternal. Let me ask you this evening, is your life wrapped up in the things that you're afraid to lose? And is the fear of death overwhelming you? Would you allow life to be more than what I'm afraid to lose, and death